Jung discovered that mental illness was not the most dangerous thing. It was about those who see things that others do not, and why they are killed by this power. In his medical writings, Jung described individuals who possessed what he termed differentiated perception. These individuals were able to read subtle facial expressions to determine your emotional state, and take note of psychological patterns that nobody else had. They were too strong for people's masks, discovered lies immediately, and sensed the tense atmosphere in each room. Jung viewed the discovery as dangerous. No one understood today because these guys were always left alone, completely exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships, not because they were weak, but rather because witnessing everything was mentally taxing. I'll show you what Jung discovered that was the most dangerous, about people who can see everything, and why he believed that this unique talent would either transform you into something amazing or kill you. The case that made Jung's most dangerous discovery public started with a case he wrote about in his personal notes. In 1913, when Jung was going through a mental crisis following his split from Freud, an observant but shy type came to see him. This case was an example of what Jung would later refer to as a rare mental type that possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She was able to enter any room and immediately sense the psychological environment, who was emotionally hurting and who was speaking the truth. Jung wrote to the man, who harbored private grievances, demonstrates a remarkable ability to see things that others are not aware of, but it appears that this ability is stressing her out a lot. Rather than having an advantage, she was unable to engage in small talk. She was unable to keep up with her friends since she was able to see through all social masks. She was unable to maintain employment because everyone around her was open and afraid. Jung realized he wasn't treating illness when her appearance disrupted the group unconscious deals which aid groups work on. What occurs when the unconscious mind has too much knowledge was the topic of his investigation. When opposing viewpoints render society unsustainable, he monitored how well she characterized individuals. It has to do with other people, as though she understands their innermost feelings and the motivations behind their actions. They turn out to be remarkably accurate when I carefully probe her to verify her statements. Here, there was no illusion or psychosis. The level of awareness was so high that society was now in danger. But Jung discovered something even more terrifying. This patient's unique perspective made explanations seem impossible. In his Red Book, Jung wrote, "There are some of us whose mental machines are so well tuned." Jung then began to investigate what he would later refer to as the psychological phenomenon of involvement mystique, in which people with very different intuitions are overcome by other people's unconscious thoughts, but also the entire unconscious atmosphere of their
surroundings.
Recent research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive individuals supports Jung's initial findings. About 20% of people are more sensitive to feelings and senses, according to her research, but Jung discovered something more precise. According to Jung's classification of psychology, the shy and sensitive type, which makes up around 1% of the population, is able to see unconscious trends with startling clarity in addition to having strong emotions. According to him, those who are intuitive are able to process information from their brains that goes beyond simple social cues. However, the sadness concealed behind false smiles is visible to those who are unable to see the unconscious thoughts and feelings. Behind arrogant facades, they can see that people are desperate. The group shade is palpable to them. Jung wrote that the danger is not in our perceptions, which groups decide to overlook without realizing it. However, because it makes people feel isolated, People find it unbearable to look in the mirror when they can see clearly what others cannot or will not see. When your greatest strength becomes your greatest weakness, because it prevents you from participating in the group unconscious. It results in what Jung dubbed the superior function problem. However, Jung discovered that the true threat was not what people believed, because people with very different perspectives can clearly see what other people are thinking. As a result, they are targets for what Jung documented in detail. Jung's psychology of the unconscious describes it as a shadow image that people attack without realizing it, because it shows them aspects of themselves that they don't want to see. He discovered that this rule applied to all relationships. But nothing has a greater psychological impact on their environment than the life of the parent who never lived, particularly on their children. The unaware mind has two choices when the shadow of someone else appears to them through the unclouded eyes of another: go for the mirror or add the shade. Jung frequently discussed this trend in his clinical writings. Those with clear vision are held responsible for the issues. They are merely observing. For his patients with differentiated senses, this is always the case. The person would lash out at them for being negative or causing trouble when they politely mentioned that someone appeared to be struggling. People would accuse them of being critical when they expressed concern about obvious issues, or process issues where none existed. Jung recognized that this was no coincidence. It was mental defense. He wrote that everything that irritates us about other people can teach us more about ourselves in our dreams and memories. But for most people, it's simpler to attack the shadow of someone else. Instead of examining what is reflected, this results in what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. People who are highly conscious frequently become the issue in every group they join. Jung looked at the person with better vision, not because they make things difficult, but because they highlight problems that everyone already has in their minds, turns into a safe haven for everything the group doesn't want to share about itself. This setup explains why these people feel constantly attacked in addition to being confused by an inexplicable force. But Jung's most terrifying discovery was still to come. Jung developed 4 distinct patterns as a result of seeing that overwhelming image, which manifested itself in various ways in various individuals. Each demonstrates a unique method of comprehending what's in your unconscious mind, whether you're a quiet, intuitive type. Others, type 1, the feeling-wise. Young patients with records who have a distinct feeling function and a combination of shyness and intuition. These individuals are not only aware of their own thoughts, their bodies are able to sense it. They completely adopt the emotions of others. They frequently lack the ability to distinguish between their own thoughts. Jung wrote about the feeling, as well as those they have unknowingly taken in. Type 2, the thought intuitive. These individuals perceive internal patterns and are emotionally contagious at all times, feeling emotions that others around them do not, and predict people's behavior with startling accuracy. Jung observed that they were able to predict when relationships would end, bad job losses, and emotional breakdowns months before they occurred, not by applying common sense, but by identifying patterns without realizing it. According to Jung, they have a remarkable ability to see the logical conclusions of mental processes that are not yet visible to others. Type 3, intuitional feeling. Young patients who were able to perceive the physical effects were noted. Jung claimed that these people are early warning systems because they can detect mental feelings in others before symptoms appear, recognize exhaustion before it is noticed, or sense a tightness in their body that indicates emotional distress. Type 4 is the pure intuition mind, which may lead to physical and mental illness in those around them. The strangest kind Jung came across put together introverted perception and what he called undifferentiated extra feature. They saw everything but had trouble getting organized or sharing their thoughts in a way that makes sense. Jung realized they are always feeling too much to handle. Getting a lot of information without realizing it, without the right mental framework to deal with it. In a healthy way, it's important to know your unique pattern, because each type needs a different way of dealing with what Jung called the problem of integration. But first, you need to know why Jung thought this finding was so dangerous. Because Jung saw the terrible effects, lack of differentiation in how he saw his cases. So, he came to the conclusion that after seeing everything without a good psychological fit were real threats to the health of both individuals and the greater community, Jung pointed out 3 specific dangers that made this find so dangerous. Risk 1. Disruption of the collective mind. Jung wrote about the person who sees too clearly, putting the collective deals at risk, which leads to group cohesion as soon as someone sees through the shared lies that brings people together, the deals that aren't said to ignore some facts, they become a force that wrecks things. Jung noticed that things like families and societies work in part because of collective. There are unspoken deals about what will be recognized and what won't. The person with a lot of insight accidentally breaks these deals simply by being themselves. Danger 2. Being alone with your thoughts. Jung wrote about how different kinds of vision lead to what he called the issue of better function, when you have the strongest mental strength turns into the cause of your worst pain. The curse of consciousness was written by him, is that it can't be given to people who don't have it. The person becomes an island of awareness. In a sea of sleep, this kind of loneliness isn't just social. It's crucial for these people. A lot of people say they feel like they're living in a different world from everyone else. Danger 3. Loss of identity the most seriously. Jung discovered that people who take in other people's unconscious thoughts, people often lose touch with their true selves. They are so overloaded with outside psychic information that they can't tell the difference between their own minds and what they take in from their surroundings. Jung named this kind of involvement mystique, a state in which mental borders disappear as the person and the group become one. Contents of the mind, he wrote, is not just social separation that's dangerous. That is, psychological destruction. The full loss of one's identity supporting the idea of shared ownership. This is why Jung thought about combining superior sense. Important for more than just therapy, but mentally important because better perception that wasn't integrated was so dangerous. So, Jung came up with what he called the individuation process, way of keeping one's identity that is planned out while creating a conscious connection with unconscious material. Step 1. Recognizing and telling them apart. Jung taught his very smart patients to first figure out when they were taking in psychological information. He named this kind of discrimination conscious, being able to tell the difference between inner experience and material taken in unconsciously from the outside world. Jung wrote that the first step is to figure out what you own and what other people own. Without this unfair treatment, there is no way to help each person grow. In order to heal, Jung told his patients to spend time alone every day, letting the stuff that was absorbed settle. That way they could hear their own true psychological voice. Step 2. Adding the shadows. Jung found that people who can see other people's shadows clearly, they often do this because they haven't added their own. The more you say you can't lie, the more you can do it. Being mean or selfish, the more upsetting it will be for you to see these traits in other people. Jung wrote about everything that bothers us about other people can help us learn more about ourselves, but only if we're brave enough to look inside. Instead of keeping their eyes on the outside, shadow integration means realizing that you have all the qualities of a person. You see this in other people. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you whole and lets you see clearly without judging. Step 3. Actively taking part. Jung called the last step in the process. Being aware of and taking part in the collective mind, the power to interact with other people's mental states without getting too stressed out or forgetting who you are. Jung wrote about the separate person, can connect the awareness and unconscious, helping other people become aware of their unconscious without putting their own mental health at risk. To do this, you need to build what Jung called psychological containers. The power to briefly hold someone else's unconscious contents while always being aware that they are not your own just because. Jung knew that people are either destroyed or changed by better perception. So, he studied historical people to learn what makes integration work and what doesn't, as well as mental breakdown for Nietzsche. Unintegrated vision was the case. Jung was deeply affected by Nietzsche's ideas, but saw how his better understanding in the end led to a mental breakdown in dreams and memories thoughts. Jung wrote about Nietzsche's capacity to see past society, religious and intellectual fronts with shocking clarity, but Jung said that Nietzsche never learned how to put these ideas together. Positive way rather than using what he saw to help heal. He used it as a tool against people. Jung wrote that Nietzsche had a deep understanding of how people work. He was still associated with his higher role, that instead of summing it up to make a healthy personality, Jung noticed that the isolation and ultimate breakdown of nature, shown what happens when awareness is higher, remains unintegrated. The person is consumed by what they see, rather than being changed by it. Meister Eckhart's case, success in integrating. Jung learned a lot about the medieval spiritual Meister Eckhart, whom he saw as an example of someone who had successfully integrated better perception. Eckhart had what Jung called mystical intuition, the capacity to understand spiritual and mental things that other people couldn't get to, but not like nature. Eckhart used his ideas to do good things for other people. Jung wrote Eckhart turned his higher understanding into wisdom that could feed others without being too much for them. He saw very well, but spoke in ways that made people want to understand instead of fight back. Jung said Eckhart's success was due to what he called aware of being humble, knowing that having better perception is a gift that should be shared carefully. This is not a tool to be used. The journey of Jung's own integration, the most important. Jung wrote about his own struggles with too much information during what he called his meeting with the unconscious. From 1913 to 1919, written down in the Red Book, it was an insanity that scared Jung, who wrote, and was only saved by my ability to understand what was going on with me because I worked with patients. His better understanding of what's going on in people's minds, his own and others, almost killed him. Until he learned how to consciously combine these events, Jung made a big discovery. When he noticed that his main thoughts were not sick, but evolved. They stood for consciousness, trying to grow beyond the limits of our present collective. This realization changed how he treated people with the same things, because people with better sight often have to deal with being alone. Because of Jung stressed how important it was to find what he called the few who understand other people, able to interact with a differentiated mind without being defensive. Jung talked about this in the development of personality. Becoming who you really are is the chance of a lifetime. But this luxury can't be enjoyed by itself. It needs to be witnessed by people who can tell if something is real. Jung found that there are three main types of partnerships for the highly alert person kind. 1. Fellow individuated people. Jung wrote, the person who is formed recognizes another person who is formed. Right away, there is an air of being there, something that can't be faked. Truthfulness. Most of the time, these relationships happen quickly and strongly. You both know each other. Being part of what Jung called the conscious minority, these relationships don't happen very often, but they're necessary for mental health. With other fully formed people, you can be totally real, without worrying that they will be too much or dangerous. Type 2. People who are individuating. Jung saw that people were actively shaping their own identities. Treatment that works, spiritual practice for mental work, can often deal with better perception without getting defensive. They might not have it themselves, but they know how important it is. Jung wrote, people who know themselves well can handle being known by others. Natural barrels of type. 3. Jung pointed out people who, while not having better vision themselves, be what he called natural container roles, being able to hold mental information without being too much of it. These people may be older adults who have been through tough times in their lives. The act of recognition. Jung came up with specific ways to spot relationships that are safe. They really want to know about your findings. Rather than first fighting against them, they are able to admit their own flaws and limits. Without shame, they show what Jung called psychological mindedness, interest in what's inside. They keep their emotions in check. When they have to face unpleasant truths, they are genuinely interested in growth and awareness. Protocol for gradual reveal. Jung taught a careful way to show that someone is sensitive. 1. Start with little. Some nice thoughts. 2. Pay attention to how they react to comments. 3. Watch to see if they get defensive or interested. 4. Gradually go deeper based on what they've already shown they can do. 5. Always talk about findings as offers instead of claims. Jung stressed, it's not important to find people who agree with everything you say. Finding people who share your views is important, as useful additions to our understanding rather than threats to their sense of self-worth. Due to integrated, a better view helps people grow individually and as a group. So Jung thought that good individuation was very important, not just for your own health, but for the evolution of their own mind. Jung wrote about this in The Undiscovered Self. The live spirit has always been carried by the person who makes society change. He thought that people who are able to integrate, people with a better view of things, become what he called culture carriers. People who help awareness grow through the 4 stages of change. Step 1. Recognizing without being overwhelmed. Making the first change takes place when you learn to recognize your intuitive skills without getting crushed by them. This is what Jung called conscious acceptance of the superior function. Jung wrote, realizing what you are is the first step toward becoming wise, not what someone wants to be or fears, becoming merging at stage 2, without separation. The second part involves learning how to make good use of your sense while keeping important ties. This is what Jung called social individuation, becoming your true self while staying close to others. Jung saw that an individuated person doesn't shut themselves off from the world, but does so with more awareness. Step 3. Service without giving up anything. When your view turns into a gift, the third change takes place. You offer instead of something you have to carry. Jung called this taking part consciously. Using your skills to help other people without draining yourself. Jung wrote, the greatest honor of your life is to become who you really are, and then to put that real self to work for the whole. Stage 4. A memory that doesn't hold anything. In the last stage, there is something Jung called an ultimate function, adding to the collective mind with your perception development, without a connection to whether or not other people acknowledge or accept your efforts. Jung saw that an independent person plans for the future. Not to get personal attention in the present. Cultural healing is what comes out of the integration. Jung thought that people who are able to properly integrate better perception is an important part of development. They can see things that most people aren't ready to see yet, helping to get people ready for the next steps in their growth. Jung wrote about things that don't come to mind. Fate comes to us. People who learn integration are very aware, help bring hidden thoughts to the surface until they show up in harmful group behavior. Jung did warn about some problems, though, that could stop this change, which is why the way to combine superior awareness contains certain risks. Consequently, Jung wrote down the most common ways people stop their own process of change. Mistake 1. The inflation trap. Jung wrote a lot about psychological inflation. When people become connected with their higher function, in place of deliberately integrating it in two pieces about critical psychology, he said that the risk is that the ego will merge with the character, causing prices to rise that keeps the person from having relationships with other people. People who are very smart often fall into what Jung called having a prophet complex, thinking that they have to wake everyone up. This leads to teaching judgment and, in the end, being alone. Jung had noticed the moment someone thinks they are the only one who knows the truth. People who are unconscious hold those who have fallen into the trap by the forces that one wants to understand. Mistake 2. The reason for withdrawal. There are few Jung cases where people use their better perception to give a reason for staying away from society completely. They were sure of themselves, that some people were too unaware to be worth talking to, which Jung saw as spiritual power being dressed up as wisdom. Jung wrote, to truly become an individual, you have to interact with the inner world, not get away from it. The loner who shuts himself off from the world has not risen above it, but has lost to it. Trap 3. The helpers. Jung noticed that some people who are very perceptive need to be wanted all the time. They completely describe who they are, because they can see and help other people, not paying attention to their own growth. Jung said, be careful when impression turns into identity. The person goes away behind the function. Being unique is not this, but the opposite is also true. Giving up your own identity for a job. Mistake 4. The overwhelming return. People who have been successfully blended can go backwards. During times of worry, trauma, or big changes in life, they stop setting psychic limits for themselves and become filled with other people's unspoken thoughts. Once more, Jung stressed that integration is not a forever goal, but a changing process that needs your full attention all the time. The care of the integration. Jung came up with ongoing ways to keep fusion healthy. Regular solitude for figuring out your own mental thoughts from stuff taken in making a choice about when and with whom to interact. Observant skills, continuing shadow work so you don't put your unconscious thoughts onto others. Link with other people able to provide help and reality checks. As a way to deal with too much information. Artistic expression. It was written by Jung that an integrated person does not reach completion, is aware that she is learning to dance with their own complicated mental states, because Jung understood what superior perception meant in the framework of group mental growth and development, because of he thought that people who were very sensitive played an important role. Human awareness has an evolutionary purpose. In the book The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote the live spirit has always been carried by the person who makes society change. He thought that people with better sight were what he called pioneers of consciousness, people whose psychological growth comes before group readiness. The trend in history that Jung saw that over time people who have better awareness often showed up before the collective awareness was ready to join in. Their thoughts, they were like early scouts for psychic lands that people would finally have to explore. Jung wrote what first shows up in a person as psychological understanding. Eventually, it shows up as cultural change in the group. The person is a testing ground for awareness. projects that will help everyone in the long run, new manifestations. Jung thought that in this day and age, people who are very sensitive might be feeling patterns in psychology that explain how groups act, unsustainability in social and natural areas before it becomes clear. There are spiritual possibilities outside of present religious frameworks. There are scientific effects that others haven't thought about. Group shadow items that need to be consciously integrated. What Jung saw, the sensitive person feels the problems of the group first. And most strongly, their own signs often show what the whole group needs to work on. The service without dying, Jung's important information was that better perception is best for growth when it's carefully put in, rather than suffering without realizing it. The point isn't to die for your beliefs, but to connect what is with what will be. Jung wrote, the separate person works for the group, not by giving up their individuality, but by finishing it off so well that it's a gift to everyone, the final integration at the most advanced level of growth. Jung saw this. People who have good perception don't take their skills too seriously, seeing clearly without caring about what other people think or accepting what they see, seeing deeply without feeling like they have to fix everything they see. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the power to naturally help the mind evolve, not by forcing or preaching, just by being more aware of how they are. Remember the case that Jung had in 1913, the shy and quiet intuition who came to him when he was having a breakdown. Jung's individuation method was used for 3 years. Her life changed totally. She learned to tell the difference between the things that were going on in her mind and what she learned from other people. She became a counselor and got a job where her unique perspective helped people who were having trouble. She connected with people who respected what she had to say, instead of being afraid of them. Most importantly, she stopped seeing her better understanding as a curse, became aware of it as what Jung called a gift requiring deliberate growth. Jung wrote about how she changed. This person learned not to see less, but to see smarter, not to feel less deeply rather than to think more deeply about what she saw. Her gift was still whole, but it became a part of her life instead of crushing her. This is Jung's most dangerous finding, that some people are born with intelligence that goes beyond what the group is ready for. This high-level understanding will either kill them through loneliness and stress, or change them into exactly what people need for their mental growth. Your better understanding isn't a problem with the way your mind works. It's a more advanced part of mental growth. You're not broken because you see things other people don't. Thought-wise, you're ahead of your time. The question isn't whether you should hide what you see to fit in with the unconscious mind of everyone. What is the question? Whether you'll learn the skills you need to be an individual in order to actively integrate your perception. Jung's individuation method shows how to get out of dangerous isolation, from being overwhelmed by information to having combined wisdom, from a psychological curse to a natural benefit. You were meant to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to help the growth of awareness. The world needs what you have to say, but they need to be provided with the integration, smarts, and a knowledge of strategy that changed the idea of danger into cultural medicine. Your gift doesn't weigh you down. Your problem is that you don't know how to relate to your gift. Learn to consciously add it in, and you turn into exactly what Jung thought. People who are very sensitive were meant to be pioneers in mind, getting people ready for the unavoidable growth in their minds, but not yet clear. The most dangerous thing Jung found wasn't that some people see everything. It's most people who see everything. They will never learn how to use what they see well. The danger isn't in how people think about it, but by not building conscious relationships with amazing skills. You're not too much for this world. You are just what mind evolution needs. Once you learn how to use your senses as Jung learned how to use his, the risk of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the wise and integrated mind your gifts need if you think you might be the person Jung described. Of the highly alert person, there is a rare type of person like you that Jung thought were necessary for consciousness to evolve. Feel free to say in the comments what kind of distinct perceiver you are. Your journey of individuation is linked to the journeys of others on the same road. Sign up to get more information about Jung's findings, about how minds grow and change that goes beyond collective unconsciously held back. If you want to read more of Jung's ideas, click here. About different personality types, things that don't follow normal trends. Check out my video on 7 bad things about Carl Jung, places that make you lose your mind, where I talk about the psychological settings that are especially dangerous for people who are very sensitive and aware, young and old ways to keep your mind safe, in touch with an inner world. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next world.